Good evening. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Welcome to Truth Report, your weekly deep dive into the stories that shape the global surveillance landscape and the power structures behind it.
Tonight we have two stories that, on the surface, look completely unrelated. A German chancellor flying to Beijing, and lawmakers around the world demanding that websites verify how old you are before you can log on. But stick with us, because by the end of this broadcast, you're going to see the thread that connects them both.
That thread is control. Who gets to watch you, who gets to track you, and who gets to decide what information you're allowed to access. Whether it's a government leveraging economic dependency or a tech company building an identity verification database, the question is always the same: who holds the keys?
So let's get into it. Our first story takes us to Berlin and Beijing, where Germany's new Chancellor Friedrich Merz is making a diplomatic move that has observers across Europe and Asia paying very close attention.
And our second story comes from IEEE Spectrum, the engineering world's paper of record, sounding an alarm about age verification laws that are sweeping the globe. Laws that promise to protect children but may end up building one of the most comprehensive digital surveillance systems ever conceived. Let's begin.
Breaking news from the world of geopolitics tonight. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is heading to Beijing this week for meetings with Chinese leadership, and this visit is sending shockwaves through Western diplomatic circles. According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, Merz warned just last year that economic dependencies on China make Germany, and I'm quoting here, susceptible to blackmail.
That is a remarkable statement from a man who is now walking into the Great Hall of the People. But what makes this visit truly significant is the context. Merz is not some wide-eyed newcomer to transatlantic relations. From 2009 to 2019, he chaired the Atlantic Bruck, one of the most influential non-profit organizations promoting the German-American relationship. This is a man whose career was built on the idea that Germany's future lay firmly in the Western Alliance.
And yet here he is, flying east. So what changed? The answer is economics, pure and simple. Germany's export model, the engine that powered Europe's largest economy for decades, is under severe strain. The automotive sector, which represents roughly 20% of German industrial output, is facing an existential crisis. Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers are eating into market share not just in Asia, but in Europe itself. Companies like BYD are producing vehicles at price points that German manufacturers simply cannot match.
Let's put some numbers on this. Germany exported approximately 107 billion euros worth of goods to China in 2023. China remains Germany's single largest trading partner by volume. But the trade relationship has become deeply asymmetrical. German companies are increasingly dependent on Chinese supply chains for critical minerals, for battery components, for the raw materials that the green transition demands. When Merz said Germany was susceptible to blackmail, he wasn't being hyperbolic. He was reading a balance sheet.
And this is where the surveillance angle comes in, because economic dependency is a form of surveillance. When one nation controls the supply chain for your most critical industries, they don't need to put cameras on your street corners. They already know everything they need to know. They know your production schedules. They know your inventory levels. They know which factories are running and which ones are idle. That is intelligence collection through commerce.
Exactly right. And the South China Morning Post reporting highlights something crucial here. Merz confronts what they describe as the fiscal reality that moral posturing does not sustain an industrial economy. That is a devastating assessment. It means that all the talk from Berlin about reducing dependency on China, about de-risking supply chains, about building strategic autonomy, all of that rhetoric has run headfirst into the wall of economic reality.
Let's talk about who benefits and who loses from this diplomatic pivot. The winners, at least in the short term, are German industrial giants. Companies like BASF, Volkswagen, Siemens, these corporations have massive investments in China and they have been lobbying furiously for continued engagement. BASF alone has invested over 10 billion euros in a new chemical complex in Guangdong province. These companies need access to Chinese markets and Chinese consumers to survive.
The losers are harder to identify because they're more diffuse. European security hawks lose leverage. The transatlantic alliance loses cohesion at exactly the moment when the United States is pulling back from multilateral engagement. And ordinary German citizens lose something they may not even realize they had, which is the leverage that comes from economic independence. When your chancellor tells you that your country is susceptible to blackmail and then flies to meet the people doing the blackmailing, that should concern every citizen.
There's also a surveillance dimension that rarely gets discussed in polite diplomatic circles. China's national intelligence law, passed in 2017, requires all Chinese organizations and citizens to support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence work. That means every Chinese company that German firms partner with, every joint venture, every shared technology platform, operates under a legal framework that compels intelligence cooperation with Beijing.
And this is not theoretical. German intelligence services have repeatedly warned about Chinese corporate espionage targeting German industry. The Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, Germany's domestic intelligence agency, has identified China as one of the primary threats to German economic security. So when Merz travels to Beijing to deepen economic ties, he is simultaneously deepening Germany's exposure to a surveillance apparatus that is built into the legal DNA of every Chinese business entity.
What we're witnessing is a broader pattern across Western democracies. The post-Cold War assumption that economic engagement would liberalize authoritarian regimes has been thoroughly discredited. Instead, what happened is that authoritarian regimes used economic engagement to build leverage over democracies. The surveillance isn't just digital. It's structural. It's embedded in supply chains, in investment relationships, in the dependency architectures that make modern economies function.
And the deteriorating transatlantic environment that the South China Morning Post references only accelerates this dynamic. With the United States increasingly focused on bilateral deals rather than alliance management, European nations like Germany are being forced to make their own arrangements. That means more engagement with China, not less. More dependency, not less. More exposure to surveillance through commerce, not less. It is a vicious cycle with no obvious exit ramp.
The Atlantic-Bruck connection is worth dwelling on for a moment. Merz spent a decade chairing an organization whose explicit purpose was to strengthen German-American ties. He built relationships with American business leaders, politicians, and intelligence officials. He understood, perhaps better than any German politician of his generation, the architecture of Western alliance. And now he's pivoting. That tells you everything you need to know about how fundamentally the geopolitical landscape has shifted.
It tells you that the old playbook is dead. The idea that Germany could maintain equidistance between Washington and Beijing while profiting from both was always an illusion, but it was a comfortable illusion. Merz's visit to Beijing is an acknowledgement that comfort is no longer available. Germany must now make hard choices about its economic future, and those choices will have profound implications for the surveillance environment that German citizens and European citizens more broadly will inhabit for decades to come.
Now let's turn to our second story, which brings the surveillance question much closer to home. IEEE Spectrum, one of the most respected technical publications in the world, has published a devastating investigation into what they're calling the age verification trap. Lawmakers around the globe are pushing legislation that would require websites, particularly social media platforms, to verify the age of every user before granting access.
And this sounds reasonable on its face. Protecting children from harmful online content is a goal that virtually every parent supports. But as IEEE Spectrum's reporting makes clear, the technical reality of age verification is far more sinister than the political rhetoric suggests. To verify someone's age online, you need to verify their identity. And to verify their identity at scale, you need to build an infrastructure of surveillance that would make an intelligence agency blush.
Let's break down what age verification actually requires in practice. There are essentially three approaches. The first is document-based verification, where users upload a government-issued ID like a driver's license or passport. The second is biometric estimation, where artificial intelligence attempts to guess your age from a photograph or video of your face. The third is third-party verification services that act as intermediaries between users and websites. Every single one of these approaches creates profound surveillance risks.
Start with document-based verification. If every website you visit requires you to upload your driver's license, you have just created dozens, potentially hundreds, of copies of your government ID scattered across servers operated by companies with wildly varying security practices. Data breaches are not hypothetical. They happen constantly. Equifax, T-Mobile, LastPass, the list is endless. Now imagine those breaches include not just your email and password, but your government ID linked to a complete record of every website you visited and when.
The biometric approach is arguably worse. Facial age estimation requires companies to collect and process biometric data, your actual face, at massive scale. This is the same technology that powers facial recognition surveillance systems used by law enforcement agencies worldwide. According to research cited by IEEE Spectrum, these systems don't just estimate your age. They generate biometric templates that can be stored, shared, and cross-referenced. You're not just proving you're over 18. You're enrolling in a global biometric database.
And here's what the lawmakers promoting these bills either don't understand or don't want you to understand. There is no such thing as age verification that doesn't also function as identity verification. You cannot confirm that someone is over 13 or over 18 without also confirming who they are. The two are technically inseparable. So every age verification law is, by definition, an identity verification mandate. And identity verification mandates are, by definition, surveillance infrastructure.
IEEE Spectrum's reporting highlights that this is not happening in one country or one jurisdiction. This is a global movement. Australia has passed legislation requiring age verification for social media access. The United Kingdom's Online Safety Act includes age verification provisions. The European Union's Digital Services Act creates frameworks that enable age verification requirements. In the United States, multiple states have passed or are considering age verification laws, with Texas, Louisiana, Virginia, and Utah leading the charge.
And the tech industry's response has been deeply revealing. Some companies are opposing these laws, but not because they care about your privacy. They're opposing them because compliance is expensive and cuts into engagement metrics. Other companies are enthusiastically building age verification products, seeing a massive new market opportunity. Companies like Yoti, which specializes in facial age estimation, stand to become gatekeepers of the internet. Think about that. Private companies, accountable to their shareholders and not to you, deciding who gets to access what online.
Let's talk about who benefits from this. First, the obvious beneficiaries are the age verification technology companies themselves. This is a market that barely existed 5 years ago and is projected to be worth billions. Yoti, Jumio, Verif, these companies are lobbying hard for age verification mandates because those mandates are effectively government-created markets for their products. They have a direct financial interest in the expansion of these laws, and they are spending accordingly.
Second, and this is the part that should really alarm people, governments benefit enormously. Once age verification infrastructure exists, it can be repurposed. If every citizen must verify their identity to access the internet, you have built a turnkey system for content control. Today it's used to keep 13-year-olds off Instagram. Tomorrow it can be used to restrict access to political speech, to journalism, to whistleblower platforms, to anything a government decides is inappropriate. The infrastructure doesn't care about the policy. It just enforces whatever rules it's given.
And this is not a slippery slope argument. This is what is already happening. In authoritarian countries that have implemented real-name internet registration requirements, those systems are routinely used to suppress dissent. China's real-name registration system, which requires identity verification for internet access, is a cornerstone of its censorship apparatus. When Western democracies build the same technical infrastructure under the banner of child safety, they are building the same capability, period.
The IEEE Spectrum investigation also raises serious questions about effectiveness. Studies have consistently shown that determined minors can circumvent age verification systems with relative ease. Virtual private networks, borrowed credentials, synthetic identities created with readily available AI tools, the workarounds are numerous and well documented. So you end up in a worst-case scenario where law-abiding adults surrender their privacy and anonymity while the children these laws are supposed to protect simply route around them.
There's also a chilling effect on free speech that deserves attention. The Internet's power as a tool for democratic participation depends in part on the ability to speak anonymously or pseudonymously. Whistleblowers, political dissidents, abuse survivors, LGBTQ individuals in hostile environments, these people depend on the ability to access information and express themselves without their real identity being attached to their activity. Age verification destroys that capability entirely.
And let's be clear about the data security implications. We're not talking about one database. We're talking about an ecosystem of databases maintained by hundreds of different companies, each one a target for hackers, each one subject to subpoenas and legal demands, each one a potential point of failure. The attack surface is enormous. A single breach of an age verification provider could expose the browsing habits and real identities of millions of people simultaneously. This is not a theoretical risk. It is a mathematical certainty given enough time.
What IEEE Spectrum is really documenting is the construction of a surveillance architecture being built in plain sight, with bipartisan support, wrapped in the language of child protection. And that language is powerful. Who wants to be the politician who voted against protecting children? Who wants to be the journalist who questions child safety measures? The framing is designed to make opposition politically toxic, and it's working.
The technology companies promoting these solutions are also deeply intertwined with government surveillance programs. Many of the identity verification firms marketing age verification products also serve law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Jumio, for example, provides identity verification services to both commercial clients and government agencies. The same biometric databases built for age verification can be and in some cases already are accessible to law enforcement through standard legal processes or, as we've seen repeatedly, through informal data sharing arrangements that operate in legal gray zones.
Now here's where our two stories tonight converge, and this is the synthesis that we think is critical for our viewers to understand. What connects Germany's economic entanglement with China and the global push for age verification? It is the normalization of surveillance through seemingly legitimate institutional frameworks.
That's exactly right, Alex. In both cases, the surveillance doesn't arrive wearing a uniform and carrying a warrant. It arrives wearing a business suit and carrying a contract. Germany's economic dependency on China creates a surveillance exposure that is embedded in trade agreements and corporate partnerships. Age verification creates a surveillance infrastructure that is embedded in consumer protection legislation. In both cases, the surveillance is structural, not incidental.
And in both cases, the people being surveilled are told it's for their own good. German workers are told that trade with China preserves their jobs. Internet users are told that age verification protects their children. Both statements contain elements of truth, which is what makes them so effective as justifications for surveillance. The most dangerous surveillance systems are the ones that deliver genuine benefits alongside their monitoring capabilities.
Consider the parallel in how these systems are defended politically. German business leaders argue that decoupling from China would be economically catastrophic, that the cost is simply too high. Age verification proponents argue that the alternative is children being exposed to harmful content, that the cost of inaction is simply too high. In both cases, the argument is structured to make opposition seem irresponsible. You must accept the surveillance because the alternative is worse. That framing should always trigger skepticism.
What we're seeing across both stories is what surveillance scholars call function creep, the tendency for surveillance systems built for one purpose to be gradually expanded to serve other purposes. Economic data sharing agreements with China that began as trade facilitation tools now function as intelligence collection mechanisms. Age verification systems built to check whether someone is over 18 will inevitably be expanded to enforce content restrictions, track browsing behavior, and build identity profiles.
And the actors driving both stories are not governments alone. They are public-private partnerships where the lines between corporate interest and state interest are deliberately blurred. German corporations lobby for engagement with China because it serves their bottom line, and in doing so they expand the surveillance surface. Technology companies lobby for age verification mandates because it creates markets for their products, and in doing so they build surveillance infrastructure. The profit motive and the surveillance motive have become indistinguishable.
This is the pattern we want our viewers to recognize. Surveillance in the 21st century rarely looks like surveillance. It looks like economic development. It looks like child protection. It looks like convenience, safety, efficiency. The cameras are hidden inside the architecture of daily life, inside the supply chains that deliver your products, inside the login screens that grant you access to information. The watchers don't need to come to you. You come to them, voluntarily, because the systems are designed so that opting out means opting out of modern life itself.
And that's the trap. Whether we're talking about a German chancellor who can't afford to walk away from Chinese trade or an internet user who can't access a website without surrendering biometric data, the dynamic is the same. The cost of refusal has been engineered to be prohibitively high. The surveillance is technically voluntary but practically mandatory. And that gap between technical voluntariness and practical compulsion is where our civil liberties go to die.
So what do we do with this information? First, we pay attention. We recognize that surveillance threats don't always come from intelligence agencies with three-letter acronyms. They come from trade deals and terms of service agreements. They come from laws with names designed to make you feel safe. Second, we demand transparency. When governments build surveillance infrastructure, regardless of the stated purpose, we demand to know exactly what data is being collected, who has access, and what safeguards exist.
Third, we support organizations and technologists who are building alternatives. Privacy-preserving technologies exist. Zero-knowledge proof systems can verify attributes like age without revealing identity. Federated systems can reduce the concentration of surveillance data. These alternatives are technically viable but they require political will and public demand to implement. The reason they're not being adopted is not technical. It's because the current trajectory serves the interests of the powerful.
And fourth, we connect the dots. We refuse to treat these stories as isolated incidents. Germany's China policy and age verification laws are symptoms of the same disease, the systematic dismantling of boundaries between public and private life, between commerce and surveillance, between protection and control. Until we see these connections clearly, we cannot fight them effectively.
That's our show for tonight. We covered Germany's reckoning with Chinese economic dependency and the surveillance implications that follow from it. We exposed the age verification trap and the identity surveillance infrastructure being built under the banner of child safety. And we drew the line between these stories to reveal the deeper pattern of surveillance normalization that defines our era.
The sources for tonight's reporting include the South China Morning Post's analysis of Chancellor Mirza's Beijing visit and IEEE Spectrum's investigation into age verification technology and its implications. As always, we encourage you to read the primary sources yourself. Don't take our word for it. Verify independently. That's not just good journalism. It's good citizenship.
Truth doesn't have a party. It doesn't have a stock price. And it doesn't expire. If tonight's report mattered to you, share it. Talk about it. Ask your elected representatives where they stand on age verification mandates and economic surveillance. The conversations that happen after the cameras turn off are the ones that actually change things.
I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity.
And this has been Truth Report. Stay vigilant. Stay informed. And above all, stay free. We'll see you next week.